Good afternoon, everybody. I'd like to welcome you all here to the launch of the Transfire Hub, which is the research and innovation hub for transforming the foundation industries. We have a rather packed afternoon, and I just wanted to talk a little bit about what the objectives are for first the launch, and then later on this afternoon we'll talk about what the objectives are for the rest of the afternoon, the conference. So essentially, firstly, I'd like to introduce you to the Transfire team and the objectives of Transfire and some of our project partners. We also want to try to explain how Transfire fits into the ISCF. This is the Industrial Strategy Challenge Fund, as was Transforming the Foundation Industries Challenge. But lastly, what we really want to do is to try to gather some of your views on how you feel Transfire can support you. And we welcome your views on the challenges that Transfire could best support you with. As I say, we have a packed afternoon, a packed launch. Immediately after I finish speaking, we'll have Bruce Adderley, the director of the challenge, introducing the challenge itself. And after I have introduced what the Transfire Hub is about, then we'll have a presentation by Sue Black, our Equality, Diversity and Inclusion lead. Then we have some work streams which we'll come on to, which are how we're going to deliver the objectives. And then lastly, we'll have a foundation industries perspective from some two senior people in the industry, from John Bolton and Paul Booth, in the industries, I should say. And then lastly, we have a short Q&A session chaired by the Deputy Director of the Hub, Professor Kostas Salonitis. Then we'll have a break before we move on to the conference, which will start at 3 o'clock. So how do you feedback your views or sharing your views? Firstly, you can introduce yourselves in the chat, and you can use the chat for questions and comments and the Q&A. And we really want to hear all your views and your ideas for what you think you might have. And we would ask you if you could post them into the application called Padlet, the link to which you can find here on the screen. But I think one of my colleagues is going to paste this also into the chat, so you should be able to feedback in there. And Padlet is a form where you can type in your views and ideas, and under a number of different objectives. So if you look through it's a sort of matrix of different concepts. Please look at that, and please add in your views when they come up. When something inspires you, or you listen to one of the people speaking and it stimulates an idea, please add it into that, and we will be giving you feedback on that right at the end of the conference, in the wrap-up session towards the end at about 5 o'clock. So that leads me on to welcoming the director of the Transforming Foundation Industries Challenge, Dr. Bruce Adderley of UKRI, who's going to give us a broader view of the challenge and its vision and the context. So over to you, Bruce.
Okay, thank you very much, Mark. If we could have the first slide, please. So, the Transforming Foundation Industries Challenge. First of all, welcome to everybody. It's a pleasure to see so many of you here today, both new faces and old friends from the years gone by. I am going to give a really quite brief introduction to the challenge, because as Mark said, we've got so much to get through today. So it's going to be the barest gist of what we're about, but please feel free to get in touch with myself. My details are there, or any of my team following today's event, if you need to know more about us and are looking to engage, whether through the hub or through any of our other initiatives. So next slide, please. Thank you. So the Transforming Foundation Industry Challenge sits as one of over 20 societal level challenges that have now been running for up to 3 years, and as you can see, an absolutely enormous budget, and is doing a huge amount in the innovation space in terms of where the UK is seeking to be in the future. So it's just to emphasise that even though this challenge is a big initiative in its own right, it sits within an even wider UK economic level challenge. Next slide, please. So the foundation industries, many of you I'm sure have seen this slide from us before. Just a brief reminder of the scale of the industries that we're seeking to address. Depending on whose report you look at, the numbers are in terms of 40 to 50 billion pounds a year for the economy, 400, 500, 600,000 people, depending how you specify your boundary, involved in those sectors. So absolutely crucial and a vital part of our economy both now and going forward. But there are some big to be faced right now and into the coming decades ahead. We've got to certainly address the CO2 emission issue, and with net zero driving those targets ever higher, ever closer in time, the need for the challenge and all the other things that are going on in the sector are ever more important. Next slide, please. So the vision for the challenge is to fundamentally transform the foundation industries, and really to try and catalyse that so that these sectors remain vital parts of the UK economy in the decades to come, and that they've got the right to continue to operate in a society where we are heading towards net zero and we want to be far more environmentally sustainable. But what are we going to attempt to do? Next slide, please. The challenge contains many interventions within the innovation space. Using this suite of innovations, we're trying to significantly increase the flow of innovations in this space right across the foundation industries. And I hope, although a little complicated, you can see from this diagram that the Transfire Hub is a vitally important part of those interventions and knits well with all the other interventions that we're making. And it's been great, even in only its early days, to see how the team at the Hub are interacting with the team at the Network Plus, and with the KTN, and with yourselves as stakeholders in the Hub, to make sure that we're going to get a significant tranche of university-led research out into industry as soon as possible to address these challenges. And like I said earlier, if anybody's got any questions about all these other elements of the challenge, please feel free to come back to myself or one of my team. And speaking of those other initiatives, I need to make a plug just before I finish. Next slide, please. Next week, we launch our largest financially collaborative R&D competition, focused at demonstrating technology on foundation industry sites. As you can see from this slide, there's a briefing session next week, and there's a whole range of sessions and opportunities coming up over the next 6 weeks to help you build initially an expression of interest in this competition in the next 2 months, and if you're successful at that stage, a full proposal in the new year, where we're looking forward to funding several multi-million-pound projects to take technologies forward right across the resource efficiency and energy efficiency sphere of the foundation industries. What are we talking about in scope? Well, if I could have my final slide, please. The scope, as ever, as we normally do, is really quite broad. We are seeking to achieve a broad spectrum of technologies that are of benefit to multiple sectors. There's an awful lot to do, and we're building up a portfolio of projects across all the calls and all the competitions we've done over the space of 2 years. And so later next year, it may be that we'll do a wrap-up call in those areas where we've identified that there's still a bit of a shortfall in innovation space, and at that stage we want to prioritise. But for now, please just come to us with whatever are your best proposals in any of these areas. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Bruce. So now I'm going to present the overall view of the Transfire Hub itself. So you've seen that we've called this Transfire the Transforming the Foundation Industries Research and Innovation Hub. So these pictures on the screen at the moment encapsulate what the industry's image or the public's image of the foundation industries are. smokestack chimneys, flaring off of gases in chimneys. It doesn't look very pleasant. Lots of heat and energy and stuff being released up into the atmosphere, all related to the climate challenge and greenhouse gas emissions. That's the public's image of what the foundation industries are, and they're not too far away from reality in many senses, because these are real pictures of real sites across the UK. So the industry, the challenge itself is funded from UKRI, as Bruce said. It's across the cement, ceramics, chemicals, glass, metals, and paper industries. And what's the scale of it? In total, yes, it's 10 million. That's made up of a project which is almost £6 million in size, funded at 4.9 FEC over 3 years. And we'll be getting matched funding to bring that up to the £10 million. We've got 12 research organisations, more than 60 companies, and approximately 14 trade associations, professional engineering institutes, and others. So a large body of people and in organisations involved, and I'll come on to the balance in a minute. The funding actually started on the 1st of July. It was announced in May, and today, of course, is our official launch. So the vision is that we will create a multidisciplinary research and practice-driven research and innovation hub that optimizes the flows of all resources within and between the foundation industries. It will also improve competitiveness and will work with the communities and assist the UK in achieving greenhouse gas emission net zero 2050 target. It will also develop an ED&I strategy for the foundation industries. So we start off, our diverse consortium currently is from more than 80 organisations. It includes our investigators, partners, and shows both depth and breadth. We've come together to initiate the change in the foundation industries. We won't complete it, and we'll be taking a holistic and strategic outlined approach, coordinated approach across the sectors. The consortium is made up from academia, industry and trade associations, and others such as the PEIs, as I mentioned. And we have 12 research institutions involving 20 different investigators. We have companies and trade associations across all of the sectors in cement, ceramics, chemicals, glass, metals and paper. But we also have investigators and partners in the business of energy and circular economy, AI and data and software, management and operations and equipment supply, and social sciences, including the environment, recycling and end users. We also have some international relationships within the consortium amongst the COIs and the project partners to enable benchmarking and sense checking of the work that we're doing. The project team, the operations team, is led by myself with my administration team at Cranfield. The deputy director is Kostas Salonitis. The technical program manager is Anne Valenta from Leeds, and the business development and hub manager is Sanju Padea from Cranfield. But the other co-investigators across the team are from a range of different universities. So we have, for cement, we have Professor Phil Purnell from Leeds. We have Professor Xiaowei Zhang from Exeter. For ceramics, for chemicals, we have Professor Justin Perry and Dr. Matt Unthank from Northumbria. We have Professor Paul Bingham for glass from Sheffield Hallam, Professors Rossi Secchi and Sam Evans from Cardiff for metals, and for paper, Dr. Graham Ormondroy from Bangor University. But then we have the cross-sectoral challenges, and we have a range of people from Jonathan Cullen and Kostas Salonitis and Anne Valenta looking at energy, life cycle and circular economy. We have the materials resources input from the British Geological Survey with Dr. Evie Petrovazzi, Clive Mitchell and Tom Bide. We have computer science and AI from Prof. Sue Black at Durham. We have management and operations with Professor Peter Ball at York School of Management. And then policy, environment and society with Professor Steve Yearley from Edinburgh and Steve Sinderby and Gary Hack from the York Stockholm Environmental Institute. Lastly, but really not least, and actually a major strategy, is our equality, diversity and inclusion work package, which is led by Professor Sue Black from Durham. We have a number of organizations, as I said, here are a number of the logos of some of the partner organizations. But what are we actually going to be doing? We've got some initial work streams. We've co-created these 3 work streams to start initially. And they are transferring best practice. Where there's muck, there's brass, or the lead would like to say where there's muck, there's gold. And we have working with communities. These are our initial thoughts, and we've developed these with industry, but we will remain flexible in the direction that these go, depending on the outcomes of the initial research that we're doing and the external factors that may influence the research. And these will later be presented in this session by the workstream leads in a few minutes. We'll also be working with the Network Plus and the industries themselves to develop the ED&I strategy that enables the industry to become fully inclusive and take advantage of the skills and capabilities that a diverse workforce will bring. By the end of the funding, we'll have created a transformational environment with a core of cross-sectoral, diverse researchers and industrial stakeholders. We will have created a body of fundamental research and a suite of research directions. We will have demonstrated a number of quick wins to ensure that the benefits of the hub are there, and a set of governance mechanisms to ensure diversity in all its guises will be sustained across the foundation industries and the collaborations. With the TFI Network Plus, we will have created a cross-sector capability enabling us to work together across the foundation industries for the next 15 to 20 years, targeting net zero 2050. This will help change long-held concepts in the materials industries. Instead of waste, we'll have byproducts. Instead of low energy, we'll move to resource efficiency. And from recycling to dematerialization, this will be enabled using the creativity, the results from the inclusivity and diversity of the research team and the partnerships we will develop. And that leads me very nicely into our next speaker, Professor Sue Black. Sue is the Professor of Computer Science and Technology Evangelist at University of Durham. And as I've said before, she's leading the Transfire ED&I strategy. So over to you, Sue.
Thanks very much, Mark. I'm hoping someone can put my video on because I'm not able to do it myself. So if someone could put me on my first slide, thank you, and add me onto video as soon as you can. Thanks very much. So thanks very much, Mark, for the introduction, and hi, everybody. I think okay, I'm on video.
There you are.
So now you can see me too.
I can see you.
Great, thank you. So I have to say that when I first chatted to Mark, however long ago it was, about being part of this project, I hadn't heard of the foundation industries. So that's something that we need to address with the general public, I think, because lots of people haven't. But it's an absolute pleasure to be involved in this programme in Transfire, because it's such an exciting opportunity to have a massive impact across 6 industries and to really make a difference in terms of Transfire itself, but also particularly from my perspective in terms of equality, diversity and inclusion. So I'm going to talk a bit about me to show you what my background and expertise is. And we've got our first meeting next week, our diversity and inclusion meeting. So I'm really hoping to see lots of you there where we can chat in more detail about what we're specifically going to be doing with EDI on this project. So as you can see here, I'm a Professor of Computer Science and Technology Evangelist at Durham University, and I've been there for 3 years now, working throughout my career on lots of projects to do with diversity and inclusion, particularly focused on gender and women to start with, and then moving more towards diversity and inclusion of all sorts more recently. Next slide, please. Thank you. So one of the first things that I've done in the area that's had a reasonable impact, I think, is setting up a programme called Tech Mums. So that's actually a social enterprise that I set up in 2012, I think. And I come from a background of, I guess, kind of a dysfunctional family background. I only went into education when I was in my mid-20s, and already then a single parent with 3 children. And I found that going into education, going to college and studying maths, going to university and studying computer science has enabled me to have, you know, a very successful career doing all sorts of things that I never would have dreamed of before. And around 2012, I was thinking to myself, how can I help to create that sort of opportunity for other people, other women in particular, and decided to focus on mums because, you know, I know what it's like to be a single parent mum, trying to study, trying to have a career, and also bring up 3 children on my own. And I really see that not only did technology and education change my life, but it massively changed my children's lives as well. And so I set up a social enterprise, Tech Mums, to enable mums to see, particularly in disadvantaged areas, to see what opportunities are out there for them if they just understand some very sort of basic, what we now call digital skills. Next slide, please. So one of the programs, the projects that we did with Tech Mums was to work with Facebook. So it's just an example of one of the things that we did. So here we are in Facebook studio in the Facebook HQ in London. And we worked with Home Start UK and brought together lots of incredible women, incredible mums, to create a, it was kind of like a sort of magazine, a bit like This Morning, I guess, kind of chat show, where we had mums talking about their experiences and also talking about tech at the same time. So we'd get people coming in and telling mums how to use tech to their advantage. And we really had great engagement from that. Apparently we had higher percentage engagement than David Beckham had from his, sorry, it was Facebook Live from Facebook Studio. So we didn't get the numbers that David Beckham had because he had millions. I think we just had, I can't remember exactly how many now, but we had a high percentage engagement. So mums were really engaging with our material. Next slide, please. And so another example of things that I've done over my career is ended up being a mentor on BBC Three Girls Can Code programme. And so I think it's really important, you know, these ideas that I've had over time, initiatives have been in computer science. But what I really want people to think about is kind of think outside the box about what we can do around diversity and inclusion to really make a difference in lots of different ways. And this, I guess, kind of comes under public engagement in that, you know, if you're kind of networked in with people in the media, you can make a difference quite quickly. You can really impact people's lives. And so I'm still in touch with some of the women that were on this BBC Three Girls Can Code programme. I was there as a mentor. I don't know if any of you saw it a few years ago. Next slide, please. And again, so since starting at Durham, I've really focused on bringing more women, students and staff into the computer science department at Durham. And so one of the first things that I did was to set up a network for the women students. So this is our mainly undergraduates here. And because at Durham we did have 15% women first year undergraduates, we managed to get that up to 30% last year. We focused on various different initiatives to try and boost the number of women in the department, both staff and students. And setting up a network just to connect everyone together was very important right at the beginning. Next slide, please. So another thing that we've done at Durham is to raise the profile of women in computing. We brought in Dame Stephanie Shirley, who you can see here, who's one of the UK's like most well-known tech pioneers, who set up one of the world's first software houses back in the 1970s. Just an incredible woman who came to speak at a public lecture in Durham. And now, well, we didn't have one last year because of COVID, but we're going to be having an annual Shirley lecture, which she's very kindly given her name to. We got Google involved in that. They sponsored the public lecture. And the idea there was to not just the university, but the kind of wider public in Durham, bring them into understanding computer science, to see great role models in computer science, and to just kind of get them engaging with the university and, you know, kind of thinking about pioneers, role models who are from the UK, rather than most people, if you talk about tech pioneers, automatically go to men in the States. So it was nice to have a woman role model and showcase her. Next slide, please. So another thing that we've done at Durham is to bring in lots of speakers from industry into our first year computer science undergraduate classes. And so that's something that I run. So bringing speakers from here, for example, software engineering manager Nadia from Facebook and Andy from Twitter, coming in to chat to our students. And so that's another thing that we can do in terms of this program, is to think about, well, so how can we get industry and academia working together and kind of showcasing the people that are out there already and what they're doing. Next slide, please. And a program that we got funded just after I started at Durham is Tech Up Women, which has been a roaring success. So I've seen the problem for years, really, where lots of companies, tech companies, want to hire women from diverse backgrounds, in particular technical women. And also I've met so many women with lots of potential, but without a background in technology, that want to get into tech. So we created a program which in 6 months online trains women from with a degree in any background into a tech career, and that was working with 15 industry partners and 3 other universities, and it's been a roaring success. We finished the first cohort just before lockdown, and 50%, so 50 of our women have now got jobs in tech. And I just love the fact that, you know, getting that message out there that you don't have to kind of stick to one path in your career anymore. Times are changing. And my favorite example is one of our Tech Up Women graduates who had a degree in medieval literature, who's now working as a games programmer in a games company. Next slide, please. And I just love this photo. This is just some of our group taking selfies at our residential in Durham. So that just makes me smile, that selfie. Next slide, please. And so, like I mentioned, we've managed to improve the number of women undergraduates in computing at Durham from 15% to 30%, which was incredible. During lockdown, unfortunately, it's a bit lower than 30 now in this year's cohort. But, you know, that's for various reasons, which is very hard to do some of the things that we did in person during lockdown. But we're very keen that it's going to go back up to 30% and then hopefully to 50 at some point. And again, kind of making the point that, you know, that lots of things that I've done over the last 15 or 20 years have been around publicising stuff. And so we don't only just want to do good things ourselves, but to really get the message out there. And so, you know, when I knew that we had increased our figures, I went straight to the BBC technology correspondent and chatted to him about, well, could you write about this? So I think, you know, those kind of connections with the media are really important. Obviously, you've got to have a good story, but I think it's important to think about how we can connect in with the media to tell our stories as well. Next slide, please. And the most recent thing that we've done is to create a podcast called 100 Moments That Rock Computer Science, as you can see there. And we focused here, so we didn't specifically say it, but we focused on having people from diverse backgrounds, 50% women, 50% men on our podcast, and we managed to get to number 5 in the charts, the Apple technology charts with that. And so we're just focusing now on our guests for series 2, and it's been a massive success. And so that's another thing that we can think about doing for the foundation industries, is having a podcast. I kind of want to showcase there's all different sorts of ways of getting the message out there, and I'm really keen to get to know as much as possible about the foundation and industries as quickly as possible, so that we can work together to think about how we're going to promote ourselves to the outside world, but also across the industries. Next slide, please. So that's kind of all of my background, or some of my background, and just to kind of give you a flavour of the sort of things that we can think about doing in this area, rather than just following a kind of standard path. So most of my work has been around women, and then more recently people of colour, but we're really interested in diversity right across the piece. So you can see here people of colour, women, LGBTQI+, disability and social class. And I think there's lots of opportunities for us all to work together to really make a massive difference. And I don't know what we're going to be doing yet. We've got our first meeting next week, so I'm really looking forward to meeting everybody that's interested in helping us. And I think I'll just finish there. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Sue. Fantastic to see all the work you've done, and I really hope and I know that you're going to have an impact in transforming the foundation industries. I absolutely know that.
Thank you.
I'd like to hand over now to our technical program manager, Dr. Anne Valenta for Leeds University, who will be chairing the next part of the program.
Thank you. Thank you so much for introducing me. So yes, technical program manager of Transfire at the University of Leeds. So it's my role to kind of set out the impact-driven research program that we're carrying out and to support collaboration and integration across the whole of the program. So today you'll hear the introductions of the three work streams that we have. And can I have the next slide, please? And the three work streams are working across 6 technical working groups. So we have 6 groups that are sector focused, and they're brought together by work going on in the work streams. Then if we could also have the next slide, please. And also through a series of case studies. So we'll have 2 sets of 6 more technical case studies in workstream 1 and 2, 8 community case studies in workstream 3, and hopefully also a series of ED&I case studies as well. And case studies should be seen as sort of short research projects of 12 to 18 months that bring together at least 2 of the work streams with a technical working group, or at least 2 technical working groups with a work stream. And in that way, we build those connections across the whole of Transfire. Okay, could I have the next slide, please? So if you have any ideas for case studies, then please feel free to raise them also in via the Padlet. So in the first column, you'll see that we're asking about research priorities for Transfire. So you can add there any case study ideas that you may want to share. If you're having trouble accessing the Padlet, then please also feel free to use the chat for that as well. Okay, so without further ado, next slide, please. I'd like to introduce Jonathan Cullen first from Cambridge University, where he is a lecturer in energy, transport and urban infrastructure, and is heading also the Resource Efficiency Collective. So over to you, Jonathan.
Thank you. Sorry, thank you, Anne, and thank you, Mark, and Sue as well for those great talks. So I'm based at Cambridge and I'm leading the first work stream, which is called Transferring Best Practice Applying Gentani. Next slide, please. And this sits in this nice diagram we've created. It sits really at the front end of the industry, thinking about the materials and the energy that are going into these industry sectors, ceramics, metals, cement, glass, paper, and bulk chemicals, and how we can produce products efficiently with the least amount of resources. Next slide, please. So when we think about this idea of transferring best practice and Gentani is a concept which means what is the minimum resource that you need to carry out a process or to deliver a product, if you like. And I've just captured here just a very simple Sankey diagram. I draw lots of Sankey diagrams to show this idea. We've got some process, some sector, some industry, some facility that's taking in both energy and material inputs to deliver some useful product to people. We also have perhaps some useful byproducts that might be created and some waste products as well. And this work stream is really about thinking across these sectors. Where can we learn across the sectors to apply best practice in reducing the amount of energy input, and of course energy is linked to emissions, so decarbonizing, but also thinking about the material and the material efficiency of the process, how well we're using our materials to create these useful outputs. And as a part of kind of mapping what's going on in these industries, we will also know what byproducts or wastes might be being created, which could be used in workstream 2, which you'll hear about soon, in a symbiotic relationship. You know, can these materials that are maybe not going into the main product be used in other processes to create other projects, other products. And so we're aiming to establish this best practice across the foundation industries by comparing the performances of processes and equipment across the sectors, establishing limits, so efficiency limits, material limits, what we think are the minimum amount of energy and material inputs to processes, and benchmarking environmental performance. Next slide, please. If you followed any of the work that I've been involved in, we do a lot of these Sankey diagrams, this mapping process here, and I'm showing here just a map of global steel flows, and we've done maps of steel, glass, chemicals, aluminium. So many of the big sectors we've mapped at the global level. And what these maps do is we trace the materials all the way through from the mine, the extraction, through production, through manufacturing, and to the end sectors, including the recycling. And what you can start to see when you look at the whole system is opportunities to intervene and make it more efficient. And in this case here, we spotted that 25% of all steel never actually gets into a product. Instead, it's recycled within the industry. And so we could work perhaps on reducing these return flows down the bottom coming around. What we want to do is take this mapping idea and apply it at the UK. So next slide, please. This Sankey diagram isn't quite as pretty because this is work that's ongoing that I wanted to show you, but this is a Sankey diagram of metals in the UK and the different processes where metals are being used. It's very early work, and we've created some software to draw these diagrams automatically, and they still need cleaning up. But I just wanted to show you where we're heading to try and understand these material streams and how they go, how they transfer across society, essentially. And to make these, we use lots of statistical data on production, on trade flows. So it's really important for the UK to have the imports and exports, looking at raw materials, intermediate, final products, and where those products end up and where their waste streams are. Next slide, please. So the work stream 1.1, the first part was about mapping materials. The second part is really about understanding the processes and how much energy is required for these processes, how much emissions might be created, what wastes are going. Essentially, you create a recipe of the process, and that sits on top of the material flows. So for every ton of material flow, we also know you need a certain amount of energy, you produce a certain amount of waste, you produce a certain amount of CO2. And so we're working to create recipes across these foundation industries that are best practice, and also comparing that to what we see in reality in real facilities in the UK and across Europe, to get an idea of how well our industrial facilities are working compared to a best practice. We also want to explore commonalities across those processes. Are there similar types of processes? Can we measure performance across those processes equally? Next slide, please. And as part of that second sub-stream, if you like, we're looking at processes, but also looking at equipment. What we've realized is a lot of equipment across the sectors is the same. Each sector will have material conveying equipment, perhaps drying equipment, perhaps steam boilers, motors, etc. And so by understanding the equipment models and doing models of equipment, we can see pieces of equipment operating at similar efficiencies across the sectors and compare them, understand what the variance is on those. Next slide, please. The third part of the work stream is to benchmark performance. So here we're looking for what type of metrics could be applied to benchmark different industries and within the industry sectors themselves, but also hopefully across the industries, to understand how efficient these industries are, where the losses might be occurring, and how do we compare a real facility, a real plant with real data to a benchmark and give an indication of where maybe improvements could be made in this idea of resource efficiency. To do that, we'll need to collect lots of data and understand that data across the sectors, and be able to compare individual facilities and plants to that data across the sector. Next slide, please. And the final part of the work stream is delivering best practice, and Anne, who you've heard from, will be leading this, but this is around the engagement with project partners. This is about talking to industry and to the sectors, and delivering research that we're doing into those sectors, but also hearing what the needs are from those sectors. And so we've created these technical working groups for each of the foundational materials, which bring together the researchers, industrial experts, trade associations, policymakers, non-profits, etc., to be able to converse and talk and share best practice across the sectors that are involved. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Jonathan. So without too much, we'll do questions in the end, so please do keep them coming, actually, questions via the chat in the Zoom. And we'll get to the questions in the session around sort of 14:45. So but please do add any that you may have. We'd really welcome that kind of discussion. So I'm going to hand over next to Paul Bingham from Sheffield Hallam University, where he is a professor of glasses and ceramics. And yeah, without further ado, Paul, over to you, really.
Thank you very much, Anne, and thank you, Mark, and thank you all of my colleagues who've previously spoken, and thank you to all 109 current participants. It's great to meet you all. Just start my video. Hopefully this is working. Okay, so I'm leading Workstream 2, where there's muck, there's gold. I've renamed it, taken it upon myself to rename it with the gold, because as we all know, gold is worth more than brass, and that's hopefully where we're going to end up. So fundamental to transforming our foundation industries is developing new materials and new processes, and optimizing the ones we already have in the very short term, at least. This is going to lead to cheaper, lower energy and lower CO2 products and industries. And central to achieving this will be repurposing, reusing, recycling of wastes and byproducts, initially from mining and mineralogical sectors, the foundation industries themselves, of course, many of our partners, and also more widely. And ideally, of course, these wastes or these byproducts will be low or no carbon. Next slide, please. So I've put together a few slides that break down what we're going to do in Workstream 2 and how we're going to do it. But before I go into that, it's important for me to briefly talk about some of the things we envisage developing. Examples could be new raw materials for making glasses or cement, new sintering aids to reduce the energy associated with making ceramics, consolidation of raw materials to provide better heat transfer during what is a high energy heating process for most of these products. Alternative processes, alternative ways of getting the heat in to the process and keeping it in there while the process is going, and of course after the process is complete as well. We have looked at some examples. One might be developing novel processes that will enable us to separate or clean certain waste fractions or byproducts, which could then enable them to be used in a different foundation industry. So one example could be creating usable fiber fractions from de-inking sludges using ionic liquids or polyionic polymers. So I'm going to briefly now go through a breakdown of the what and the how. So the first part of Workstream 2 is all about inventory. So this really is the what. What are the foundation industry wastes that are out there? Now, we don't want to reinvent the wheel. A lot of this information, broadly speaking, is available. However, it's important that we also identify specifics. And so if I could put one of those World War I posters, your your Transfire needs you. One of the key things we'll be hoping to get out of our industrial partners is information on the waste and byproducts that you guys are producing, and hopefully we can help you find a use for them. We'll be defining some of the key parameters associated with these wastes and byproducts, where they are, how much there is, what's present in terms of chemical and physical composition, how variable that is with sites, with location, with date, with individual part of a site sometimes, its current fate, and of course potential applications. So a lot of this is around data collection, and it's our intention to create and maintain an open access online mineral waste inventory, which we hope will exist long after the 3 years of Transfire has been completed, and we hope that will continue to grow into the future. So the more information our partners and our guests indeed are willing and able to share with us, the better. So how we're going to achieve this is by engaging with you guys directly. So this will be things like surveys, interviews, one-to-one discussions, workshops, and through our trade associations and other bodies, some of which are listed there. Next slide, please. The second task is about developing new materials. So this is both new materials, novel materials, and of course it's essential that they have lower energy, and generally speaking they're going to have lower CO2 emissions, because the large majority of foundation industries are using energy that is at least partially derived from fossil fuel combustion. As Jonathan just mentioned in Workstream 1, through the benchmarking activities they'll be undertaking, we will also be working very closely with Workstream 1 in benchmarking, in terms of benchmarking the materials and the products to go alongside benchmarking of the processes. And this will enable us to develop optimization and reformulation strategies across the different sectors. Again, how are we going to do this? Well, a common theme you'll see from my slides is liaison. It's about communication. It's about talking with our partners, sharing information, sharing knowledge, sharing expertise and experience. There'll be, or we envisage there being, industrial site visits and surveys involved in that. So we hope to be sending our researchers out to our project partner sites, and indeed inviting our project partners to visit our universities and our laboratories, and sharing information and knowledge that way. There will be a degree of literature review and desktop survey aspect. And then of course, crucially to this, there will be lab scale R&D that we'll be carrying out in our laboratories. And of course, we'll be sharing that with you, our partners. Next slide, please. Alongside the new materials, of course, go new processes. So this is about entirely new processes that can enable us to reduce CO2 and energy. Alongside that, as I mentioned earlier, we'll be looking to optimize and modify current processes. This will enable us to, we hope, deliver some of the quick wins that we've been talking about. If we can modify and optimize technology that is already in use at a high TRL, it's going to be a much faster turnaround than developing something from a lower TRL. However, both need to happen in parallel, and that's what we'll be aiming to do. Pre and post processing of the waste, I mentioned earlier, it may be possible to use particular size fractions or to consolidate the wastes in some way that will make them compatible with foundation industry processes. Again, the first step on that path will be talking to our partners, site visits. There will be, again, some lab scale R&D involved, and most importantly of all, sharing of our results rapidly and effectively with our partners. Next slide, please. Task 2.4, which is the last task, is symbiosis. So this is about creating those cross-foundation industry symbioses. To give you an example, it could be that we identify a byproduct from the manufacture of refractory ceramics that it turns out lends itself particularly well to the manufacture of cement, for example. And we're looking to use case studies from these symbioses and potentially spin-off companies as they are developed. And in the intermediate term, we'll be looking to develop these into future trials at full scale with some of our partners. How we're going to achieve this? Well, after talking to you, we obviously need to agree the case study topic areas, and we'll be doing that in close consultation with our partners, following the generation of sufficient supporting data. So it may be that some of the lab work we do early in the project will be necessary to develop these case study ideas a bit further before we are able to make a full decision. We'll be planning and agreeing future pilot and industrial scale trials with you, our partners, and we'll ensure that any R&D we do is appropriate to provide industry with the data and support it needs in able to make an informed decision. Next slide, please. Okay, I've just put a couple of very quick, I'm conscious of time, very quick examples from my own research that kind of highlight some of the things we're talking about here. So at the top of the screen, we've got, they look very much like charcoal briquettes that have been painted green, but they're actually briquettes made from recycled glass. And these are the very fine particles that can't be put back into a glass furnace at the moment because they cause problems with melting. We've been involved in a project working with a local company, Wright Engineering, and also our DAR group, looking at turning these into briquettes, which are shown in that photo. And by doing so, we were able to successfully reintroduce them into the glass melting process and thereby save 20% of all bottle bank cullet, recycled glass, that currently goes into landfill, or the vast majority does, and consequently that could potentially be used as a recycled raw material to go back into glass manufacture. And the bottom one, very briefly, is a current project that is also UKRI funded called Enviro Ash. And in that project, we're looking at ashes that come out of various bioenergy processes, which happen to be rich in some of the very components that are great for making glass. And as you can see, we've managed to add up to 15% of ash coming from the Drax power station, which is very near to us in Sheffield, to produce some glasses with a little bit of coloration. But if you're making green bottle glass, that's really not a problem. Okay, I'll leave it there and pass back to you. Thank you, everybody, for your attention.
Great, thank you very much, Paul. Right, so we're on to the last workstream, workstream 3, which is led by Peter Ball from University of York, where he is at the management school, and he is professor of operations and management, and also the director of business and community engagement. Peter, over to you.
Thanks, Anne. Thanks for the job titles that you've pointed out. This is a selfish interest on both research as well as my my role in the school of engagement. I haven't got very many slides because I am going to repeat what Jonathan and Paul said to a certain extent, but I'm going to repeat it in a very different way. So Workstream 3 is all about working with communities and the co-development of new business. And I want to emphasize that communities should be considered in the very widest of forms, and so should new business. So when we're talking about communities, it doesn't mean to say the community around the industrial sites. It can be the community on the industrial site. So it's the whole network that's out there. And so I will ultimately give you two content slides. One is about the research and the other one is about the practice, the impact. So if we can go to the next slide. You'll have seen this slide before. I did say it was going to be repetitive. Workstream 3 is highlighted at the top there, and in part it's associated with where the first two work streams are working with the industries, but it's also working with others. And I am not embarrassed to say I don't know who those others are, and I'll get onto that. But in doing this work, we've obviously got to work with the different areas such as ceramics, metals, and cement, and so forth. But there's others out there that can be part of the value chain, and so I want to tell you a bit more about that. Just one more slide, if you can go on, please. And just to put it into context, I didn't realize there was a build. If we can go to the build until Workstream 3 appears. I'm just repeating this, putting it back into context, that there's 3 work streams cutting across the cement, ceramics, chemicals, glass, metals, paper. We are one that we're interested in practices, but we're interested in practices in a very different way, and we're interested in developing new practices. So next slide, please. So this is the research slide. If I put your attention across to the right-hand side, it's a team of us, mostly at York, but also Edinburgh and Leeds. So Steve Yearley at Edinburgh is working on a case study that is naturally going to go and be in Scotland, and I'll get onto that choice of where we work in a minute. But Steve's working all the way across the UK, but one of his first pieces will be up in Scotland. Myself, Steve Cinderby, Gary Hack, and Jean McKendry, we're looking at doing some work in the northeast initially, but we'll expand. And obviously Anne is named there and part of the team. So we have 4 research questions, and you've heard about practices before, but we want to look at it in a very different way, and it's about the culture of sharing and collaboration. So how do we foster it? And I'm going to go outside those 6 industries and give you an example that something surprised me so much that it was sort of almost open-mouthed. I've done some work with breweries, and my first introduction to breweries is a head brewer saying another brewer from 10 miles down the road wanted to know how to do something, and his response was, I can tell you over the phone, but it's easier if you come and have a look. And to me, that culture is a very different practice in a very different way of sharing in the brewing industry compared to most industries. And if you go into an event where there's brewers together, the ease at which they share practices, that they'll get through the why are you doing it, and I'll trust you to do it, right into right, how did you do this particular part? How did you do this particular saving? And because they don't see the operation side as core to their competitive edge, it's the product. I'm not sure I touched something there. I hope you can still see the slides. So we want to look at business practices and how we get that culture of sharing. The next one we want to be looking at is working with communities and companies. So in this
Peter, we can't see your slides.
Oh, I don't have control of them. So I didn't touch anything, honest, but if I can do anything, do let me know.
Yes, AJ, can you reshare the slides, please? We seem to have lost them. The host is disconnected, I see. Okay, well, in that case, I can share.
Brilliant. I was going to say, I can share if you need me to, but I'll carry on talking because the words will come up very soon. We want to work with communities, and we want to work with, this is number 2, the stakeholders. And stakeholders, I don't know who they are. We've got an initial list, but these could be anybody in the co-design for value creation. So what we want to do is to get people in workshops with those from the industry, but those supporting the area, and other people who can feed off the wastes, and I'll talk about what these wastes or resources could be, and that there's a way of reusing things and making things better for everyone. So we want to get people together, but a very diverse groups of people. Number 3, we're also very interested in place and how important place is in fostering this change. And again, right outside this area, near York, I don't know my mileage. I'm going to go for 15 miles and get into trouble for this. There's a place called Malton. It's a circular town. And so that town is a hub of businesses and the community wanting to share and wanting to see things circulate around the community. So we're really interested in this idea of place and how that can be used. And the other one is, 4th, we want to measure the impact. We want to make sure that we're capturing what the improvements are in a holistic way. We want to know what the social impacts are. So, for example, are we using waste heat for housing? That might not be a value generation activity in a sale, but it is a value generation activity in UK PLC. Obviously, we want to look at environmental, technical and economic performance. Next slide, please, Anne. my last slide. So I said I'd talk about research, and then this is practice. We've talked about cases before. We are targeting 8 cases, and on the map on the right hand side, we're initially going to go for 1 from each of the nations, and from there we will attempt to pair for research purposes and to foster the exchange of ideas. So if we have something, let's say a case from Northern Ireland that's got particular characteristics, if we can have another one, might be from Northern Ireland, might be from somewhere else, and use that for both research purposes as well as for the industries. And we do want to work beyond sectors and beyond sites. And when we're looking at these, point number 2 is we're looking to exploit resources. Low-grade heat and CO2, I know are commonly cited, but we're interested in materials, and which in some ways is obvious too, but we're also looking at land and skills. So how can we use the available resources that are out there? So we'll be having workshops, doing feasibility studies, consortium building. So we want to make change happen on a small scale and see what happens, see how people can benefit, where they're getting the value, and learn from that and spread that practice across the project and across the industries. We're seeking value opportunities for existing and new businesses. These might not be for profit businesses, they might be a social enterprise. It doesn't matter. We want to see the flow of resources and the reuse of resources. And then finally, my last point, and I'm going to again take you out of the sector, take you back to food and drink. For those of you who know about the AB sugar case, it's a site that uses sugar beet to make sugar. It is also a massive tomato grower. It sells stones, it sells turf. I'm trying to think of all the other, it sells animal feed. The way they work is they see that their site has value and they partner with people to extract further value out of that. It's not maybe core business initially, it's a venture, but eventually it becomes core to their overall operation. So where can we find value? How can we not just reduce losses, but do something with those losses so they're a valuable feed into something else? And communities in the wider sense, how can they benefit? And I've talked very fast. I hope that stimulates some interest. And thank you very much for listening. Oh, Anne, have I lost you? Can everyone else hear you?
Yeah, we can't hear you, Anne.
I'm sorry, I was on mute. I was very sorry. I was just saying thank you very much, everyone, for your presentations, and apologies for the slight disruption there, and again, disruption again. We're now back on to the normal program, and it is my great pleasure to be handing over to John Bolton, the chair of our stakeholder steering group, and also to Paul Booth, who is heading our International Advisory Committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne. Don't know whether you can see me. It might be a good thing. But good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for the presentation so far. I have to say the perspective, the industry perspective, I feel has already been very well covered by the presenters this afternoon. So quickly, Paul and myself have put together this pack, and I'll talk a little bit about the industry perspective and the challenges in the foundation sector, and then talk specifically about the role of the stakeholder steering group before handing over to Paul to give his view and his how he sees the International Advisory Group going forward. Next slide, please, Anne. So maybe controversially, but I think the foundation industries, and it's interesting to see a couple of people commented that they'd never heard of the foundation industries before now. But it is an area, a group of industries that I think have been neglected generally as far as industrial strategy is concerned over the years. When the industrial strategy was first mooted and I think Vince Cable was the business secretary, they tended to focus on the front of shop industries such as aerospace, automotive, defense, construction, etc. But then I think more recently, and I think the Transforming the Foundation Industries program is testament to that the importance of foundation industries has gained significance, and probably most significantly and potentially as a major contributor to the new green economy. So we've seen this shift of focus, and I think a focus that is very welcome, that industry welcomes and has recognised for some time. And I think on that third bullet point, I think it's important to recognise that actually much of what is needed to achieve that transformation is actually already known. So I come from the steel sector, spent a lifetime in the steel sector, and it's interesting to look at those Sankey diagrams that Jonathan showed us earlier on, and Cambridge University with Julian Allwood and Jonathan and their colleagues have done a lot of work on the steel sector to demonstrate that, you know, simply moving to a known technology, electric arc furnaces, from integrated steelmaking via blast furnaces, will utilize much of the scrap waste that is currently exported. We generate about 10 million tons of scrap in the UK every year, and about 6 of that goes overseas. You know, we could keep that here, transform it using electric arc furnaces, and actually make a significant reduction in CO2. And I think that there's general increase in awareness now that decarbonisation can actually also go hand in hand with competitiveness, which is really important as far as the industry is concerned. Because the reason you might ask why, if that technology already exists, aren't we making those changes, is because that clearly needs significant investment. And the way I see Transfire and the Transforming the Foundation Industries program being important is that actually it will demonstrate that value. It will build the case for that investment, you know, and demonstrate the value, both in terms of clearly the benefit to industry, clearly the benefit to environment, but also socio-economic benefits, such as EDI, for example. So we should leverage that investment that is needed to actually bring us greater value than maybe has been identified to date. So the industry welcomes the focus, and I think we, as far as the stakeholder group is concerned, clearly we must demonstrate how that investment is bringing a return quickly. So we must, you know, as this work continues, then it's important that we actually demonstrate to industry that that investment, their time investment, their cash investment in this program is worth their while and is demonstrating a return. And I think as that return and that value is more clearly demonstrated by programs such as this, then government and industry, well, government will understand more clearly the value it can bring. And it's important that government and industry move together to support and bring about that transformation. And then if you please move to the next slide, then again, drawing on examples from the steel sector, we've seen very recently how those partnerships are being encouraged and supported, particularly with ArcelorMittal most recently in Belgium and in Spain, with multi-million euro investment, joint investments in decarbonisation projects in Gijon in Spain and in Belgium and Flanders. So significant investment taking place. Another one more recently with Volvo and Daimler with SSAB, Swedish steel manufacturer, who are actually producing plates via totally carbon-free steel and actually CO2-free steel manufacturing processes, producing steel that is used in automotive. And then bringing it more closer to home in the UK, and obviously we're waiting to see what comes out of the current conference in terms of opportunity. But Labour are recognising that in their Green Steel pledge, they've announced a £3 billion potential investment in green steel to support investment from UK manufacturers. So I think from an industry, this is a huge opportunity. The benefit is clear, and I think programs such as Transfire will actually build the case, an even stronger case for that investment. The next slide then, please. And from the stakeholder steering group perspective, then clearly the purpose of this is to ensure that we've got effective engagement and an interface between all the activity of the cross work streams, the working groups, and the technical working groups, to ensure that we've got effective engagement with industry. and that we're seeing that the benefit is delivered to the sector to justify the continued engagement with industry. It's important that the group brings clarity to the programme and see how it fits into the wider transforming the foundation industries. It was really good to see Bruce Alderley's slide, which I'd like to see again, and maybe even go into in some depth, because we've been talking already in the groups where we've already met about how Transfire fits into the wider transforming the foundation industries initiative, and therefore what KPIs should be applied to each part of that transformation, and what are the important KPIs for Transfire itself to focus on. And a clear progress, and having heard Sue's presentation a couple of times now, I'm excited to work with her to promote EDI and ensuring that we're sharing good practice right across the foundation industries. In terms of methodology, then, the traditional ones are getting people together to talk and exchange their ideas and thoughts on how the program's progressing. Then I actually see the the sector representatives that we'll be hearing more of from this afternoon, representing the output from the technical working groups to make sure we're getting coordination, for this complex project is going to be difficult to coordinate, and we're going to rely on the input from the representatives to bring into the steering group their thoughts and ideas. And clearly it's really important that we have appropriate KPIs that actually monitor the contribution that Transfire is making to the whole transformation program, making sure that they're in place, and then we're monitoring them. So I'll hand over to Paul now to talk about the International Advisory Group.
All right, thank you, John. Hopefully you can hear me. There is one more slide, I think.
Yes.
That's it. So at the risk of stating the obvious, the UK doesn't have a monopoly on wisdom and knowledge. And I make this as a proposal, something for us to debate in one of our early meetings. We need to be a window on the world to understand what is happening in other parts of the world, what a government's doing, what are other industry sectors doing in other regions, and can we learn from that? And hopefully this will be a source of valuable knowledge and information that we can bring into and use within Transfire. So I'm very, very excited about that. But equally, I think it's the title is interesting. It's the Advisory Council, and I've worked in the chemical industry, retired now for over 40 years, and recognise a lot of what's been said by previous speakers. One thing that we haven't really maybe need to think about, though, is the environmental and economic impact of specific projects. As we're doing on Teesside, net zero Teesside and carbon sequestration. In my mind, that automatically, maybe not automatically, but certainly economically would cause industries to migrate into clusters, not because where materials were, but now where CO2 can be sequestered. So the industrial landscape is going to change. The question is, does it just happen by accident, or do we shape that? It will be a balance. And I think there's a lot of work we can do together to understand where we can make the most environmental impact, but also making sure that we understand the socio-economic impact of what we're doing as well. I mentioned here new disruptive technologies. I mean, again, I read papers on airplanes. I used to quite a lot. And there are now, for instance, the oil and gas industry, which receives a particularly bad press at the moment. There are new technologies, plasma arc deconstruction of methane to hydrogen and graphene with no CO produced at all, and there are others as well. So there are lots of new disruptive technologies on different timescales that we need to bring into the mix to understand how that all works. And another thing which I've been very conscious of is this balance between competition and collaboration. It's already been talked about, and I've seen both ends of this. When somebody invents a better mousetrap, suddenly all the shutters come up, and IP gets very, very important. So we've got to make sure that we don't see this as a barrier. We see it as, we use them as opportunities. And a lot's been said about looking across industry boundaries and looking at true symbiosis through collaboration and clustering, notwithstanding the points I've just made earlier, and then understanding the specific value of UK projects. And I think also giving some advice on how we can create a framework for making objective comparisons. I was actually thinking about sort of bringing focus, and the phrase came to mind was we can't boil the ocean, which now seems somewhat out of place in modern day thinking. But nevertheless, we can't and we shouldn't, and we do need to figure out how, what that roadmap looks like. And I see this council helping with that. The other thing I've just going through, and it's not it's a comment that I've just looking at the other presentations, and it is not critical of them at all. In fact, the opposite. They've all been very, very good. But it's interesting we continue to use the word waste. It's kind of as something which is low value and something that we don't want, as opposed to there are other words like byproducts. And I think there's still kind of a mindset in some industries that we need to get over and consider everything as not a waste, but something we reuse or value in a different way. And I also, last point from me, just on legislation, again, looking to see what other governments are doing and what impacts they have. I saw one of the comments or questions around smart legislation, which I absolutely agree on. At the risk of leaving a controversial note, if the government were to ban landfill in 5 years or whatever, that certainly concentrates the mind, and it wouldn't cost the government a bean. Not that I'm suggesting to do that, but it's interesting about how legislation can actually accelerate some of the things we're trying to do. I'm very conscious of the time, so I'm going to stop there and hand back. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Paul. I have been monitoring the Q&A for the last hour and a half that we have been going through these very interesting presentations, and there are some very interesting comments and some very interesting questions. And since we've got only about 10 minutes before we actually get to a short break, since we've got the follow-up session afterwards, I'm going to start with a question for Bruce and Mark. And I'm going to ask Bruce to first respond. And the question is related to how Transfire is going to work and collaborate with the other initiatives, both in the UKRI funded programs like NICER or other initiatives on circular economy and sustainability.
Yeah, I think the question came from Cullen at IOM, and we've touched on this discussion already. And it's absolutely key that we do talk to these centres. There's an awful lot of them around though, so we will have to target. I mean, realistically, we're not going to be able to speak to everybody. But internally, yes, we're starting the conversations with centres like NICER that Colin's mentioned. But we do need to try to get together once, perhaps every few months, discussion between the relevant centres. And as I say, I think Colin's asked the question of us before on that, and I'm very keen that we make that happen.
Thank you, Bruce. Maybe Mark, your comment.
Yeah, from a Transfire perspective, one of the things that we absolutely need to do is have a map of what all the initiatives are, and I think that's one of the things that's very difficult to find, is exactly what is being funded and what are the objectives and their outputs. So I am working with UKRI on the KPIs for ourselves, but also to generally understand what the KPIs for other UKRI funded programs are, so that we actually collaborate and work alongside them, and not both aim or not aim at doubling up the money, but being efficient in the use of the funding from the government. There are a lot of initiatives. We'll be hearing from Bryony Livesey later about the industrial decarbonisation, and that's another big initiative that we need to work alongside with. So we will be working. We will be involving them, inviting them to events through TFI Network Plus, but also inviting them to Transfire events so that we can have discussions. Only this morning I was talking to a colleague about some local funded program through circular economy, for example, in a local region in East Anglia. And that's the sort of thing that we need to keep going and having those conversations and bringing those partnerships together. So it will be not only national, but it'll be local clusters and regions that we'll be working with as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Obviously, we've got 3 work streams, and these 3 work streams have a lot of work to actually present and deliver over the next 3 years. So there is an interesting question about whether there are any low-hanging fruits, any easy wins. And I would like to ask all 3 workstream leaders, Jonathan, Paul, and Peter, to tell me their thoughts about any easy wins within the workstreams that they are leading. So I would start with Jonathan, being the first workstream.
Thank you. Yeah, Kostas. Of course, I think we always find once we've mapped materials in globally or in a country, in this case, the UK, you see lots of opportunities. And one of the things that we're really excited about is hopefully seeing a lot of the byproducts or waste, potential byproducts from these industries, which may be able to be used and working with Workstream 2 to use those. I think that will be an obvious place to work. The second is just, knowing that some of the industrial processes and equipment in the UK are reasonably old, they've been around for a while, and so identifying opportunities to bring that equipment up to best practice will be really important, and working with the industries to really understand, the right time to invest to improve equipment and improve efficiency, improve materials.
Thank you, Jonathan. Paul, your thoughts from Workstream 2 perspective?
Yeah, thank you. And I fully agree with everything Jonathan's just said, which makes my job a little bit easier. I think the quick wins from a Workstream 2 perspective are going to be around what data we can gather quickly and the synergies that we spot straight off the bat. And by we, I mean the full project team, not just the academics, but the partners as well. I fully anticipate partner A will go, oh, we'll have that one. That's perfect for our process. Now, alongside that, of course, we're going to have the optimization that I mentioned earlier. So there will be aspects of existing processes and products that we are convinced can be further optimized. And by working across each foundation industry, there will undoubtedly be optimization opportunities that we identify for widget manufacturer A, having seen how widget manufacturer B does it, of course, taking into consideration commercial confidentiality and all of those things. So that's me done.
Thank you, Paul. And last but not least, Peter.
These are unprompted, so I haven't talked to the team, so they might lynch me after this, but I see 2. I'll go for 2. They're very simple. One is just getting that culture of sharing across the named sectors, but with other sectors. I think there could be a lot of beg, borrow and stealing going on of non-commercial, pre-commercial practices, and for each individual company to be adopting these themselves without, so the project fosters that exchange, but then the individual companies can start to think about applying them themselves. The second one is the harder one, but is a sort of in practice from what we potentially can achieve. And again, personal view, there's a lot of land, there's a lot of heat, there's people who want the land, there's people who want the heat, and I think bringing different businesses together to exploit that, we've got a resource and we want it used, and another industry or companies saying we want that resource and we know how to consume it. So I think the fact that there's land available and there's heat, possibly even CO2, I think there's potential. A bit like, if I've got this right, I've forgotten the name, but it's AG Growers, I think it is, in the Northeast. That'd be an excellent example.
Thank you, Peter. I am pushed to close this session as soon as possible, so we will definitely make our best to answer all the questions in the chat. In the meantime, please feel free to add any more questions or any thoughts that you might have in the paddle that has been already shared. And we will have the next 5 minutes as a break before we start with the second part of this conference today. Again, thank you very much.